I'm Dr. Tanesha Allen. So I just finished my PhD back in October, so I'm still new to this whole doctor thing. As you can tell by my accent, I'm American. It's the first time in 4 years that I'm not ashamed of saying that. Um, and today I'll be talking about my career as a zoologist and a behavioral ecologist, more in particular. So let's see, next slide. So first I'll start out by talking about my journey to where I am now, and then talking about animal behavior, animal communication, olfactory communication, how badgers use their sense of smell. One of my experiments, which looks at how badgers can tell apart different species just by scent, and some links for if you want to know more information about certain topics. So next. So I am from Washington State. You may know it where Seattle is, the home of Starbucks, Microsoft, Bill Gates, who's getting divorced now. Also, unfortunately, the home of Twilight, but we don't talk about that much anymore. Next. So I am from Tacoma, which is an hour south of Seattle. And I did my undergrad in animal sciences at Washington State University, which is about a 5-hour drive away from Seattle. It's on the eastern side of the state by Idaho. So I went there after I graduated high school in 2009, finished in 2012, and then decided that I wanted to continue my education. So next slide. So since I never got the chance to really go abroad during, my life at that point, I decided to, do two things at once. So further my education and also go abroad. So I flew from Seattle to London. Next. So first I did my master's degree at Cambridge in 2013 and 2014, looking at burying beetles, and more particular looking at how burying beetles try to avoid mating with their relatives. And then I did my PhD at Oxford from 2016 to just this past October, where I studied badgers. So next. So during my PhD, I decided to do some outreach and doing some outreach, science communication, and also getting involved in equality, diversity, and inclusivity. And, part of that was because I wanted to improve how scientists communicate with the general public, but also, to be honest, it was because I felt really lonely and that during my PhD, I didn't really see a lot of people like me, especially, Black people and especially Black women in zoology, and also just seeing and hearing a lot of discouraging things in academia and in biology, and yeah, so there's a lot more I could say about that, but that's a completely different topic for a different time. I could easily write a book about that, but because of my experience, I wanted to improve STEM for, STEM and also zoology in more particular for everyone, especially for people from marginalized and underrepresented groups, because I want, everyone to be able to be a researcher without having to worry about all the extra drama and nonsense that may come about because of your background or identity. So first, since I finished my PhD, I was a strategic outreach officer for the zoology department because they wanted to figure out how to increase the number of BAME and state school students in their undergraduate biology program. And now I'm working as an Athena Swan coordinator at the Math, Physical, and Life Sciences division in Oxford to help improve and address gender equality. So next. So I'm, a behavioral ecologist, and behavioral ecology is defined as the study of how animals interact with their environment. So next. So I have 2 questions. So you can type your answers in the chat box. So the first question is, why do you think it's useful to study animal behavior? And my second question is, what are some methods that can be used to study animal behavior? So
if you've got any ideas for either of those, pop them in the chat box for Tanesha to see.
Yep, and I'm opening the chat now to see your answers.
We'll give it a couple seconds for people to put some ideas in.
Yep.
So we've had one answer of it's useful so humans can learn from them and their adaptations. Yeah, that's got a nice sort of broad usefulness.
Yeah.
Some ideas around methods might be observation and maybe blood and hormone samples. Another one for the first one, to understand how an animal society functions. Yeah, definitely, in terms of different groups maybe. Useful to study animal behavior so humans and animals can coexist more. That's a really interesting link with humans.
Very useful.
Understand how to stabilize ecosystems, which I think links with the previous one as well. Awesome. Some great ideas.
Yeah, really good ideas.
A really lovely one that just says simply curiosity for its own value. I think that's really lovely that often we've got excellent reasons, but also it's nice just to be curious in science.
Yeah. And that's part of the reason why I got into this field anyways. Like, I just always loved animals and watching them from my backyard. Like in the Pacific Northwest, we had raccoons, deer, and just, all these random animals just in my backyard. And I always wondered, I wonder why they're doing that. And, that's how I got to be where I am today.
I had one more idea that said it's useful to learn about their behaviors to ensure we can learn how to conserve them. So yeah, really excellent range of ideas there.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of reasons why behavioral ecology can be useful and a lot of different methods that can be used. So, just a few reasons why it's useful is, again, like some people mentioned, conservation, especially now with climate change. For construction, legally, you have to know what animals are living in the area before you build anything. So before you build a school, a house, anything, you need to, do a study to see which animals are in the area, so that way you're not accidentally hurting any animals or any sensitive habitats. Next. Diseases, as we know with coronavirus, which came from a bat, it's useful to know about, what type of diseases animals have and how they may be spreading them between other animals and also between humans. So, that's a very good way to help preserve the health of animals and humans, as we've all seen over this past year, unfortunately. And next. And also with invasive species is that some animals aren't supposed to be where they are. For example, gray squirrels. You see them in the UK, but they're not supposed to be here. They came here from America. And the issue with invasive species is that they can have a negative impact on their environment, because then they're competing with the animals that are supposed to be here for resources, and it can really disrupt the balance of ecosystems. So some ways to look at animal behavior is by collecting samples. Someone mentioned collecting blood for looking at hormones, which is something my friend did, who was also looking at badgers. She collected blood samples to look at hormones, and she looked at how badgers go through puberty. So animals go through puberty just like us. Probably not as awkward as us with acne and everything, but yes, animals go through puberty too. So you can collect samples like feathers. So next, you can look at how animals move around their environment, such as with radio tracking collars, and you can see like little radio tracking collar on the bat there. And also they can be much larger if you're looking at a larger animal like an elephant. And also you can use camera traps, which is what I used, And these camera traps, they're kind of like security cameras. You can set them up on trees or fences or anywhere you think an animal may be, and it records pictures, sounds, and videos so you can see where animals are and what they're doing in that area and at what time of day. So next. So another question to help try and put some context into an aspect of animal behavior is, why do you communicate with other people? Like, what's the point of talking to people?
So yeah, got any ideas? This one hopefully nice and easy. Pop some ideas in the chat box and we'll read some of them out. Someone said for fun. Yep. Sort of singing, I guess, things like that.
Yeah.
Develop relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Communicate your needs. Yeah, I think that's a to warn others of danger. Awesome. To share your work or interests or listen to theirs. To understand someone. To feel part of a larger group. Yeah, all really good ideas.
Yeah, all really good. And again, there's, animals communicate with each other too. And there's, again, a lot of reasons why. So I'm just going to mention just a small subset of reasons. So one reason is, to be part of a group. Animals communicate with each other so that way they can know who their family members are, who their friends are. And it's a way to kind of just make sure that, your family or your friend group is very stable. Next. Also to defend your resource. So defend your food, defend your territory. And that's what the tiger is doing there, is spraying some lovely secretion on a tree to mark its territory. Next. Also for cooperation, like if, for example, with group living animals like bees, they do this kind of waggle dance to tell other bees in their colony, oh, this is, there's some food nearby, here's where it is. And so that's a good way for animals to cooperate with each other. And fun fact, since we're talking about, Black STEM futures, it was a Black American zoologist by the name of Charles Henry Turner who discovered that honeybees can see visual patterns. And he also looked at like insect behavior in more general terms. And he also was the first one to discover that cockroaches can learn by trial and error, and that insects can like hear a pitch. So some fun Black zoology facts for you. Next. Big one is dominance. So there's some animals where they have a hierarchy where the more powerful or more popular animals want to maintain their status, and they, communicate in different ways, such as fighting by, making sure that they keep their status. And next. And also, if they want to start a family, they can communicate with each other in different ways to say that they're single and ready to mingle, or that, maybe they're a bit too young to be thinking about that type of stuff, or they're a bit too old and a bit past their prime. So next. Let's see. And so there's different ways to communicate. So there's visual signals, so things you can see like peacock feathers. There's auditory signals like, frog croaking or cricket chirping. Next. There's tactile communication, so like touching each other, so grooming, which is a way to, keep the peace. There's olfactory communication, which is smelling, and when dogs sniff each other's butts, that's a way of olfactory communication. And also with cats, if you have any or had one, sometimes cats like need, make biscuits. And one reason why it's thought they do that is to leave behind their scent, because they have gland secretions between their paws. So it's thought to be a way of like, saying like, oh, this blanket or this thing is mine. Next. And also there's some animals that use electroreception or electricity. This is mainly seen in animals that live in the water. So like sharks, they can detect the presence of their prey with electrical fields. So next. So I focus on olfactory communication, and I have a weird question for you, which I promise is relevant. What can you tell about someone just by smelling them?
Again, any thoughts, which I think might be quite amusing, pop them in the chat. So someone's put their basic hygiene, which is a very good very good thing. Someone's put their job, which I guess for some jobs, maybe not all jobs, but yeah, I'm guessing if someone works in a sewer or as a bin person, you probably could smell that.
You're like a chef or something.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's a good one. The food that they've eaten, definitely, especially if it's if they've eaten that recently. Someone's put I can't even read that word. Reciprocity to mating, which I think there are some studies about pheromones. What perfume they wear. Someone's put whether they've been drinking alcohol, which yeah, you can definitely tell. Where they've been. So yeah, lots of amusing answers for that one.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of things that animals can tell just by smelling each other, and the same goes with humans too. Let's see. So one thing that they can tell is they can tell sex. So they can tell if you're a boy or a girl, and animals don't really adhere to the gender binary. Some animals start off as a male or female in one part of their life and then turn into the opposite, the other sex in another part of life. So yeah, the gender binary is not really adhered to in the animal kingdom. They can also tell age because as you get older, you know, the bacteria and microbes on your body changes. So they can tell if you're, you know, starting to develop or go through puberty. As you can tell with humans, if someone's going through puberty, unfortunately. Next, like someone mentioned, you can tell what someone's been eating. So for example, people and animals that eat more meat, they have more nitrogen in their, you know, they have more nitrogen in their poo and pee. And so they smell different compared to people who consume less meat. You can tell health. So there's, studies of like dogs and I think cats who can detect if someone is sick or about to have a seizure. You can also tell someone's social group because whenever you're living in the same area as, certain, as a certain group of people, or maybe you're in the same workplace or same classroom, you're all touching the same things. So over time, because you're touching the same things and sharing the same bacteria, you're going to smell more like each other compared to people who live in a different household or who are in a different workplace or classroom. So next. You can also tell your social status. So more powerful, popular animals tend to smell different than the animals lower on the social ranking scale. And that's usually because of hormone levels like testosterone. And also reproductive status. So again, usually with hormone levels, they can tell if an animal is, receptive to mating and ready, trying to look for a partner. Or again, if they're a bit young or past their prime. So next. So now we're going to talk about badgers, which is my PhD study species. So badgers communicate in a lot of different ways. So they use visual signals like stripes and also raising their fur, which is called piloerection. And the stripes are a way to as you can see on their face, it's pointing down to their teeth. And a lot of animals have these types of stripes as a way to show potential predators of, be careful, this is where my weapons are. So with badgers, it's their teeth. With skunks, it's their stink bomb in the back. With piloerection is a way of showing, pretending that they look bigger than they actually are. So next. So with the badger, you can see the stripes pointing down to its mouth. With auditory, there's lots of badger noises there's a lot of different noises that badgers make in different contexts. So with play, when they're playing, when they're fighting, and I think there's also a YouTube video on there of a bunch of different badger noises if you're interested. There's tactile, so they do push each other sometimes. Usually like when they're eating close together, they just kind of shove each other just to say like, hey, get out of the way. But for the most part, badgers try to avoid any unnecessary drama. But however, because badgers are nocturnal, so they only come out at night, and also because they live underground, their eyesight isn't very good because all the dirt scratches up their eyes after a while. So they rely a lot on olfactory communication. So they use urine and feces, a fancy scientific way of saying pee and poop. So next. So let's see, that's an example of a badger latrine where they deposit their feces, and it's a way for other badgers can, come by and sniff and see what other badgers are in the area. They also have different glands, so interdigital glands, which, as I mentioned before with the cat example, there's glands like in between their paws. So next. So there's some glands like in between their paws, and so whenever they walk, it leaves behind these secretions. Other animals have these, like dogs, cats, bears, wolves, I believe, and also polar bears. Yeah, and next. And they also have this very special gland that no other animal have called a subcaudal gland, and it's underneath their tail. So in that picture, the badger is lying on his back, and so that's the tail. And that's the tail, and there's this creamy, the subcaudal secretion is this creamy margarine butter-like secretion. Sorry if anyone has eaten or is about to eat or is eating right now. And it varies in color from like yellow to like dark brown. And badgers, when they mark each other or mark the ground or whatever, they just walk along, push their butt on the ground, and then just keep on walking. And I have a video to show you exactly that. So in this video, this is from my camera trap footage from my PhD. This one badger is just sitting down, eating, just minding its own business. And then eventually you'll see another badger walking along. Let's see. And you'll see it, kind of sniffing the ground and then putting its butt on the other badger. And when badgers mark each other like this is called allo marking, or ALLO. And they use this as a way to kind of like that. So they use it as a way to use each other as like a walking billboard. So that way, especially if you're, trying to look for a mate, it's kind of like a way of putting your personal ad on someone's back. As an easy way to advertise your presence to whoever else is around. So next. So for my PhD, my main question was how do badgers use these special gland secretions like subcaudal secretion versus these metabolic byproducts, or these things that just naturally come about after you've eaten something like urine and olfactory communication. So next. So a lot of my work took place in Wytham Woods, which is near Oxford. And so during field work, 3 times a year, every few months in spring, summer, and autumn, we take these traps out to the woods, move them around with this quad bike, which is what I'm driving there with 2 of my colleagues. I should be wearing a helmet, but I'm not for the sake of that picture. So next. And so we sedate the badgers. So the badgers go to sleep for a few minutes. It's totally fine. We use a controlled substance, which I probably can't say here, won't say here. Not sure what the guidelines are on that, but we collect different samples. So fur samples, claw samples to look at hormones. We collect blood, and we also collect urine, which is what I'm holding in that picture there, in an Eppendorf tube. And then after a while, the badgers wake up, they're totally fine, and we take them back to where we caught them from. And so that's a picture of my PhD supervisors releasing a badger. So next. So for one of my experiments, which I called Don't Pee Afraid, I wanted to know if badgers could tell apart different species based on their scent. And before I go on, I have a question for everyone. What species do you think I collected urine from?
So have you got any guesses? pop them in the chat box. I'm not sure I could guess. Someone's guessed foxes. Another guess for fox. Someone's put human. Whether you have the job of collecting human urine is an interesting question. Cats, big cats, dogs, rabbits. So yeah, lots of guesses for sort of animals that may well be found in the UK. Beavers, someone's guessed.
Okay, so some really good guesses. And so I got several different species. So first I got badger urine, just to see if they could tell a badger, see like, oh, this is another badger. I also got urine from dogs because dogs are a common animal in the UK, and also dogs have been used, unfortunately, in badger baiting. So the idea is that maybe badgers, grew up to be able to tell the difference, be able to grow up, they evolved to be able to recognize a dog because dogs have been unfortunately used to attack them. I also got urine from horses because horses, again, are found in the UK, but maybe they would be less threatened by horses because, horses are not carnivores like dogs. And I did get urine from humans. So that was fun. I got urine from 3 different types of humans. So like I mentioned before, what you eat affects how you smell. So I got urine from vegetarian adults and non-vegetarian adults. And I also got urine from kids. And how I did that was I did not proposition any children for that because that is weird. What happened was that I collaborated with Science Oxford, which is this wonderful science education center in Oxford. They have an outdoor aspect to their area that has an active badger set, and the outdoor education manager talked about this experiment to his children, and they really wanted to get involved and have badgers smell their pee. So I had the manager sign a consent form, and so that's how that is. And that's relevant because, again, like I mentioned before, age also affects how you smell. So maybe badgers could tell apart an adult human from a child. So that is a picture of, let's see, what my collaborator used to ask his colleagues for urine. So that was a very lovely gesture from him. And then what we did is that we dug a bucket in the soil, and so that way the bucket is like level with the soil, so badgers or other animals can't just dig it out. And around the bucket, we put 4 tubes. So the control sample was water, just to see how they would respond to a tube with nothing, more or less nothing in it. And then the other treatments were the other species urine. And the tubes were also dug in the soil, so that way just the top of it would be visible. So again, no badgers or anything else could dig it out. And then I looked at various behaviors, so looking at how long they sniffed the samples, how long they dug for the peanuts in the bucket. So mixing sand and peanuts together to kind of create this natural foraging situation, and also try and entice the badgers to actually come close to the sample. So yeah, looking at how long they forage for food, how long they sniff the samples, how often they actually came across, or how often they came close to the samples to see if they actually were afraid or tried to avoid any odors. So next. So in terms of can badgers tell apart different species based on their scent, the answer is yes, they can tell the difference. And so what happened was that there were adults and cubs, and so this video has cubs, just digging around the bucket and investigating the sample. And so the adults tended to avoid dog and non-vegetarian human urine more, and perhaps that's because non-vegetarian humans and dogs are both large carnivores, and perhaps badgers, smelled the difference in, the urine of these large animals that are eating lots of meat and thought, oh, this is a potential predator, I should avoid them. And that's relevant because Badgers are the largest carnivores in the UK. They don't have any natural predators besides us, unfortunately. So it makes sense that they would learn to be wary of any large predators. Next. If you want to know more, so with behavioral ecology, there's a great podcast episode of ologies talking about behavioral ecology. You can find it at allyward.com/ologies. There's also transcripts and censored episodes for people with more sensitive ears. If you want to know more about olfactory communication, there's a YouTube video, which is about an hour and a half long, called Scents and Sensibilities, the Invisible Language of Smell. It talks about, about the biology of olfaction, as well as like the more behavioral aspects, such as like memorying your sense of smell. And if you want to know more about badgers, particularly the Whiteham Woods Badger Project, you can go on YouTube and look up Laboratory with Leaves badgers, and then you'll see a video of my supervisors talking about the Whiteham Woods Badger Project, which has been going on since 1987. So that is all from me. And you have any questions?
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. That was so interesting. I definitely learned an awful lot about badgers and animals in general. If anyone's got any questions for Tanesha about anything that she's covered, but also like any other areas of her work, pop them in the chat box or in the Q&A. The links that Tanesha just shared as well, we'll pull out and we'll put on the follow-up email that you'll get from this tomorrow, and also on the Black STEM Futures blog. So if you didn't write them all down really quickly, don't worry, you'll have another chance to sort of get them. So yeah, do put any questions that you have for Tanesha. I will try and stop showing my screen, but my mouse has disappeared. It's an invisible mouse, which is quite challenging. There we go. So someone's asked a really nice question that has said, how do you share your enthusiasm about this with young people, and why do you think it's important?
So I think it's, well, first of all, how do I share it? I mean, like, I feel like I'm still an amateur at this science communication stuff, but I try and just make it relatable to students. So try and use examples of, that they can relate to. And also with animal behavior is, I try and tell students that animal behavior is something you can study anywhere. So if you have a pet at home or have a pet, or there's animals in your backyard, or if you're walking along to the store and see some pigeons, you can just look at what they're doing and, think about like, why are they doing that? And also gives you an excuse to watch cute animal videos on YouTube and, look at, okay, why is this cat running away from this cucumber? Apparently that's because cucumbers look like snakes and cats are acting on that natural instinct of theirs. And let's see, and what was the other part of the question?
Why do you think it's important to sort of share what you do with young people?
Let's see, I think it's important because at least when I was in school, I didn't really know much about all the careers that were out there in STEM and in biology in general, especially when it came to animals, because like I was always interested in animals since I was a kid, but the only careers involving animals that I was really exposed to were being a veterinarian or being a zookeeper. And there was really no in between. Even with those career aptitude tests you take in school, the main careers that popped over, you can be a zookeeper or a veterinarian. So it's important to just be able to show students a different side to science, that science doesn't always take place in a laboratory, that it can be outside, it can be messy, it can involve weird or gross questions.
Awesome. There's been a couple of questions about like how you got into zoology. So obviously you have gone to high school in the US rather than in the UK, but I wonder if there was anything that you studied. I can't remember how the US education system works, but anything at the sort of the end of high school that you particularly liked at school, and why did you choose zoology rather than any other part of sort of biology or animal things?
Let's see. So in the US, we do high school, which would be your equivalent of college. And then if you want to go on to uni, you take the SATs or ACTs, which are entrance exams. And then those entrance exams go along with like our grades in school and personal statements and extracurricular activities and all that. And it's a bit different, but it's more flexible. And so when I was in high school, I took classes um, like AP biology, so like advanced biology. I took marine biology, which was a class we had just because we were near the sea. See, what was another class I took? That was the unfortunate thing, that my high school didn't have a lot of animal related classes. It was just more biology and marine biology. I also took genetics as well. And then, like, especially during high school, like, I got most of my animal experience by volunteering at the Humane Society. So I volunteered in like the small mammal section, because obviously the dog and cat sections were very popular. So the small mammal section was where we mostly had rabbits, but we also had ferrets and guinea pigs and hamsters. And then when I went to uni, so in America, what we call college, but what you call uni, I did animal science. So there's a lot of like courses with talking about like animal nutrition, getting hands-on experience with like livestock and domesticated animals. And they had a behavioral ecology or animal behavior course. So that's what I did, in the lead up to my graduate career.
Awesome. And someone, I think this sort of follows on, someone asked like what other career options would there be if someone did a zoology degree, what types of jobs could they do afterwards?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, which is something I was focusing on with my outreach work with Oxford, is that one reason why a lot of students don't really feel like studying zoology at undergrad is because they don't really know what career opportunities are out there. Obviously, besides being an academic or being a veterinarian or zookeeper. So obviously, besides those things, depends on what type of animal you want to work with. If you want to work with domesticated animals, you could, or I mean, any animal in general, you could work in animal nutrition. So yeah, so nutrition, let's see, genetics. You can work with diseases. So there's a PhD student who was in the same lab as me, but she graduated before, right as I came along. She's now she worked on diseases in badgers, looking at their immune response to TB infections. And now she's working in a COVID lab up north in, I think, Manchester. Let's see. There's also conservation, so you can do field work. Let's see, what else is there? There's also like various NGOs you could work with or volunteer for.
I imagine like a lot of biology degrees, you just get a lot of skills that are also really transferable, right? So you'll have good sort of lab working skills, field working skills that, you don't have to stay in science and they're still useful.
Yeah, and you can also go into science communication and outreach like I did. So, being able to explain all of this science stuff to non-scientists, and especially doing that, it's especially important to do that with politicians, because as we know, politics has an influence on science for better and worse. So it's important to be able to communicate to politicians and big businesses and non-scientists in general, to convince them that science is worth caring about.
Awesome. More sort of specific on your research, someone's asked a really nice question, which is what's your favorite thing about badgers that you found out through your research?
Let's see. There's a lot. So with badgers, let's see, I'm trying to find something that's appropriate, because there's some also weird badger facts too. But
we don't mind weird.
Um, like in terms of their mating system, it's a bit like some animals mate for life, but some animals like badgers mate with everyone. So badgers are very much about free love in that regard. And also in terms of like pregnancy, badgers have these two mechanisms. So delayed implantation and superfetation. And that allows them to, so badgers tend to give birth like around Valentine's Day. And right after the females give birth, you know, they're receptive to mating. And so, the badgers, they mate with everyone. And but after an egg is fertilized, it just freezes in time until, for most of the year, until around December when it finally implants in the uterus. And so it's a useful way because it allows badgers to mate at a time when when it's better, when all the animals are out and about and when there's more food. And it also allows them to deal with pregnancy and giving birth at a time when that's ideal as well. So, so it's possible for a badger to have their eggs fertilized, right now in May, and then not actually get pregnant until Christmas time, which is usually when the eggs implant in the uterus. And then after that, the badgers are usually pregnant from like Christmas time, winter solstice to Valentine's Day, and badgers also go in torpor, so it's kind of like hibernation. Um, so it's just like this weird like delayed pregnancy system, which was just really interesting to learn about.
I think kangaroos do something sort of similar where they can kind of get pregnant a second time before they've had their first. There's so many weird things in the animal kingdom that they've got clever mechanisms for.
Yeah, and it's badgers are one of the few animals that have both delayed implantation and superfetation. I think kangaroos are one of the other animals that have both. But because of that, it's also possible for each cub in a litter to have a different father. So each egg can get fertilized by a different male because, the eggs are just, released at different times.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really cool fact. Someone asked a question about the grey squirrels that you used as an example at the beginning and how you said that they had come from America and now obviously are here. Someone's asked why did they not die out? How could they survive when there's like a difference obviously in sort of weather and climate and stuff?
Let's see. So from what I know, gray squirrels, I guess, let's see, I think the original population that came here was from like the eastern United States, so like New York and the East Coast, which has, I guess, you know, relatively more extreme weather compared to here. Like there's more snowstorms and all of that stuff. And perhaps here with the climate being more, a bit more mild, and also because gray squirrels and red squirrels rely on the same resources more or less, I guess that allowed them to be able to adapt to this new environment more. And because they're competing for the same resources, that um, led to kind of like the decline of red squirrels here. But don't quote me on that. That's just from what I know.
Awesome. Two sort of questions around which animals you studied. So someone's asked, is the badger now your favorite animal? And what animals would you like to, or do you plan to study in the future?
So badgers, I do have a deeper appreciation for badgers now. It's just, how they, like I just have a deeper appreciation for badgers in general, just because didn't know much about badgers before I came here. We do have badgers in America, American badgers, but we don't have them in the Pacific Northwest. We had raccoons, which I guess are our equivalent of badgers in terms of people being annoyed by them and the idea that they spread diseases to people and pets. But my favorite animal are seals, and I would love to work with seals in the future. But I'm also open to like working with any animal, really, just as long as I can look at animal behavior and especially like mate choice, like looking at why animals choose to have, offspring with certain individuals than others. Like, I would love to do that. And also would love to continue doing outreach and communication stuff like this. So I'm trying to keep my options open.
Awesome. I'm just sort of scrolling through to see which ones we've not picked up. So someone's asked, in terms of studying zoology, they've asked, is there a large geography aspect? So do you have to understand the geography of, like, for example, where the badgers live as well as the animals themselves?
It depends on which aspect you are studying. So for me, I didn't really focus a lot on the geography aspect, um, but if you're looking at, for example, how badgers like move around their environment, um, then yeah, that would be more useful to know about the geography of everything. Um, and also, if you want to look at like, the interaction between badgers and like livestock or, the human wildlife conflict aspect of it, like that would be really important to know, just to know like where badgers are usually found, where humans and livestock usually are, and then like seeing if there's a way um, to kind of address the conflict between the two.
So actually, on that sort of conflict area, someone asked, can you use sense to keep badgers away from like things that they could into conflict? So could you use sense to keep them away from cattle?
That's a good question. So there are examples of researchers and farmers in other countries using these scent fences as a way to keep out predators. So, for example, in I believe Africa, they use like scent fences to um, deter lions from their area. And obviously, there's a lot of conflict with lions killing livestock and the farmers retaliating in return by killing the lions. Um, and I've heard the story from a friend of my supervisor who mentioned that their friend is a farmer and they pee on like around their farm to keep the badgers away. And according to them, that works. Um, I and perhaps my research could be used as a way to kind of help create a scent fence to prevent badgers from coming onto farms. And if that's a way to kind of address the badger culling conflict, then I mean that'd be great.
Um, a really nice sort of different question from someone who asked, who have been your inspirations? So if you've got any inspirations or maybe role models in zoology or not in zoology.
Um, let's see. I don't know. Like, I mean, when I was younger, like I always watched like Steve Irwin and the Kratt brothers. Like, they had this show on PBS, this American like public, education channel. But like I watched them, but on TV, but I never really saw them as an inspiration, just because like one, they didn't really look like me, you know, and also I guess even though I saw that what they were doing was cool, I never thought it was realistic. So I didn't really have any inspirations. My inspirations came kind of like later on in life, when I created my Twitter account, and saw like all the other Black zoologists and biologists out there. And I thought, wow, there's so many people who look like me doing, awesome stuff. So yeah, so I guess now like my inspiration are just the other Black zoologists and biologists on social media.
I think that's really nice as a way of getting to know more people and be inspired by, you don't have to be inspired by people ahead of you. You can be inspired by your peers as well. I think that is most of the questions that we had. I'm just going to scroll. So if anyone's got any other questions we've not touched on, put them in the chat or the Q&A. Someone asked if there is a social hierarchy in Badger society.
Um, so the work that we've done, here in Oxford suggests that they don't have a hierarchy. And that is probably because the badger population in Whiteton Woods is so high density. There's like an estimated 200 to 250 badgers there. And it's thought to be like the highest density badger population in Europe and maybe the world. But there are like other researchers who do say that there are like a dominant male and female. And I definitely see that on like some social media accounts talking about badgers, like, oh, the dominant boar, the dominant sow did this. And so the consensus from my research group is no. The other researchers may disagree, but maybe that's because their populations are of a lower density than ours. So maybe it just depends on, different populations.
Awesome. I think that pretty much is all the sort of questions that we've had for you. So I'll give it another sort of minute or two to see if anyone else pops any in. But if not, thank you so much for joining us. I think, yeah, I've definitely learned loads about badgers and about zoology. And so just whilst we see if any last minute questions come in, I'll remind everyone we've got another talk next week by Divya Persand, who is a planetary geologist, and the recording from this session will be on our blog within the next few days with all the links that both us and Tanesha have shared, so you won't miss anything from that. Last question that I think is a nice place to sort of wrap up. What's the best place to see badgers in the wild?
Oh yes, badger watching. So if you're near Oxford, or if you're going to be near Oxford anytime soon, Whiteton Woods does or used to do these regular badger watching sessions during the spring, which is when the cubs start to come out. But if you know of any badger sets in your area or any like wildlife areas, I would say like it'd be good to reach out to your local badger group. So a lot of places have, local badger groups, like the Oxfordshire Badger Group, for example. So local badger groups would probably be really helpful, in organizing badger watching trips. And if you know of a badger set nearby where you are, it's good to kind of go at dusk and sit downwind, because like I mentioned before, badgers have a good sense of smell. And so if they smell you, they're not going to come out. So, sit downwind, sit like crouch down so that way they can't see your silhouette. And and just be very quiet and patient. But I would say reach out to your local badger group and see if they're organizing anything.
Awesome. That looks like all the questions that we have then. So we'll wrap up there. Thank you again, Tanesha, for joining us this evening, and thank you everyone else for joining us. The recording for this, I saw someone asked, should be up by the end of this week, so you can catch up if you missed the start or if you are looking for the links or anything. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and hopefully we'll see some of you next week.
Thank you.